The scent of pine resin and damp earth clung to everything in the clearing, thick, suffocating, mingling with the sharper bite of anticipation that hung in the air like smoke. I stood at the edge of the gathering, my fingers twisting nervously in the fabric of my worn dress, watching as the other Omegas preened and postured beneath the watchful eyes of the Alphas who had traveled from distant packs. The pairing ceremony. Everyone spoke of it in hushed, reverent tones, as though it were some sacred rite rather than what it truly was. A marketplace where the strong chose and the weak were left behind. My pale hair, almost silver in the moonlight, fell in loose waves around my shoulders, and I tucked a strand behind my ear with trembling fingers. Mother used to say my hair was a gift, that it caught the light like water catches stars. But Mother was gone now, taken by fever 3 winters past, and her words felt like ghosts whispering promises that the world had no intention of keeping. "Stand straight, Sarah," my aunt had hissed at me before we'd arrived. "Try not to look so mousy. No one wants an Omega who flinches at shadows," but I couldn't help it. The shadows were all I'd ever known. Around me, the ceremony unfolded with practiced precision. Alpha males circled the Omegas like wolves appraising prey, their eyes calculating, measuring worth in the curve of a hip, the tilt of a neck, the promise of strong offspring. I felt their gazes slide past me, over me, through me, as though I were made of glass, something fragile and ultimately forgettable. My Omega status should have made me desirable, sought after. Instead, I was the runt no one wanted to claim. "Did you hear?" The whisper came from behind me, where 2 beta women stood huddled together. "The Alpha King himself might attend tonight. Can you imagine? They say he's been searching for a mate for 3 years now, but no one's been worthy." "I heard he's cold as winter stone," the other replied, "that he killed his own brother in a challenge and hasn't smiled since." My grandmother's medallion pressed against my collarbone beneath my dress. A small silver disc, engraved with an ancient symbol I'd never fully understood. She'd pressed it into my palm the night before she died. Her rheumy eyes urgent. "Compassion, child," she'd rasped. "When everyone else chooses strength, choose compassion. It's the only magic that never fades." I didn't feel magical. I felt small. The ceremony master's voice boomed across the clearing, announcing the beginning of the choosing. One by one, Alphas stepped forward, claiming their Omegas with a hand on the shoulder, a possessive tilt of the head. I watched as girls I'd known since childhood were selected, their faces glowing with relief and triumph. Even Mira, quiet, stuttering Mira, was chosen by a broad-shouldered Alpha from the Northern Territories. And still, I stood alone. The rejection settled into my bones like cold rain. I should have been used to it by now, the way people looked through me rather than at me, the way conversations died when I approached, the way even other Omegas treated me as though my bad luck might be contagious. But tonight, surrounded by the scent of bonding and belonging, the loneliness felt sharp enough to draw blood. When the last Alpha made his choice, and the clearing began to empty, I turned away, blinking back tears that I refused to let fall where anyone might see them. The forest called to me, dark and welcoming in its indifference. At least the trees didn't judge. I'd barely made it past the first line of oaks when I heard it, a sound so faint I might have imagined it. A groan, low and pained, coming from somewhere deeper in the woods. Every instinct screamed at me to keep walking, to return to the village and the safety of my small room above the bakery where I worked. But grandmother's words echoed in my mind, and before I could talk myself out of it, I was moving toward the sound. The moonlight barely penetrated the canopy here, and I had to pick my way carefully over roots and rocks. The groaning grew louder, more desperate. My heart hammered against my ribs as I rounded a massive oak and stopped dead. A man lay crumpled at the base of the tree, his dark clothing torn and soaked with something that looked black in the dim light. Blood. The scent hit me a moment later, copper and earth and something else. Something that made my Omega instincts flare with recognition, even as my mind struggled to process what I was seeing. Alpha, powerful, dangerous. He was barely conscious, his head lolling to one side, dark hair matted with dirt and debris. Even in this state, I could see the brutal beauty of him. Sharp features, a strong jaw darkened with stubble, shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of the world. And he was dying. I could smell death on him, creeping closer with every labored breath. I should have run. Any sensible person would have run. Instead, I dropped to my knees beside him, my hands hovering uselessly over his body as I tried to assess the damage. Deep gashes across his chest, cuts on his arms, and something worse. Something internal that I couldn't see but could sense in the way his breathing rattled and caught. "Please," he whispered, and his eyes opened, just barely. They were the color of storm clouds, gray and fierce even through the haze of pain. They fixed on me with an intensity that stole my breath. "Help me." My mind raced. I had no medical training, no herbs, no supplies. I was just Sarah, the unwanted Omega who couldn't even attract a mate. What could I possibly do for someone like him? But then I remembered old tales my grandmother used to tell, stories of Omega healers who could share their life force through a kiss, who could pull someone back from death's door through sheer will and the ancient magic that ran in Omega blood. I'd always thought they were just stories, fairy tales to make us feel special when the world insisted we were anything but. "This is insane," I whispered to myself, but my hands were already moving, cradling his face with a gentleness that surprised me. His skin was cold, too cold, and growing colder. I leaned down, my pale hair falling like a curtain around us, and pressed my lips to his. The effect was immediate and terrifying. Power surged through me. Not my power, but something I was channeling, conducting like lightning through water. It burned and froze and sang in my veins, and I felt it pouring out of me and into him, stitching wounds, knitting bone, calling him back from whatever dark threshold he'd been approaching. His hand shot up, fingers tangling in my hair, holding me there as the magic, or whatever it was, completed its work. I could feel his heart strengthening beneath my palm, could feel warmth returning to his skin, could feel the exact moment when death loosened its grip and slunk away, defeated. When I finally pulled back, gasping for air, his eyes were fully open and fixed on me with an expression I couldn't read. Wonder? Confusion? Something darker? More possessive? "Who are you?" he asked, his voice rough but stronger than before. "No one," I whispered automatically, because that's what I'd always been. Just no one. His hand was still in my hair, and he tugged gently, forcing me to meet his gaze again. "Liar," he said softly. "No one could do what you just did." Before I could respond, voices echoed through the forest, search parties, calling out names I didn't recognize. The man's expression shifted, became sharp and alert despite his injuries. "Go," he commanded. "Before they find you here. It's not safe." "But you're still hurt. Go." His grip on my hair tightened for just a moment, almost painful, definitely possessive. "I'll find you, little Omega. I swear it." The voices were getting closer. I stumbled to my feet, my legs shaking, my whole body trembling with the aftermath of whatever I'd just done. I took one last look at him, at the stranger I'd saved, whose name I didn't even know, and fled into the darkness. Behind me, I heard the search party arrive, heard their exclamations of relief and shock, heard one voice rise above the others. "Your Majesty! Thank the gods we found you!" I stopped running, pressed myself against a tree as the words sank in like stones. Your Majesty. The Alpha King. I'd just saved and kissed the Alpha King. And he'd sworn to find me. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I felt his lips against mine, felt that impossible surge of power flowing through me like a river breaking through a dam. My small room above the bakery felt suffocating, the walls pressing in as my mind replayed the moment over and over. The storm-gray eyes, the command in his voice, the promise that still echoed in my ears. "I'll find you, little Omega." By the time dawn painted my window pink and gold, I'd convinced myself it had been a fever dream. Men like him, kings, alphas, leaders of nations, didn't search for girls like me. They forgot us the moment we left their sight, if they ever truly saw us at all. I dressed quickly in my work clothes, braiding my pale hair back with practiced efficiency, and headed down to the bakery. The familiar sense of yeast and butter should have been comforting, but today they made my stomach turn. Everything felt wrong, tilted somehow, as though the world had shifted on its axis during the night, and I was the only one who noticed. "You look terrible," Rosa said when I entered the kitchen. She was the baker's daughter, round-faced and kind, one of the few people in the village who'd never treated me like an inconvenience. "Did you stay for the after-ceremony feast? I heard it went late." "No, I left early. The lie tasted bitter, but the truth was impossible. I saved the Alpha King's life with a magical kiss, and now he's sworn to find me. Right. That would go over well." Rosa studied me with concerned eyes, then pressed a warm roll into my hands. "Eat. You're too thin already, and we've got a busy day ahead." Apparently, there's some kind of royal inspection happening today. The King's Guard arrived at dawn. The roll turned to ash in my mouth. The King's Guard? Here? Strange, isn't it? This village hasn't seen royalty in a decade, but they're going house to house, searching for something, or someone. She leaned in conspiratorially. "Mara from the tavern says they're looking for the woman who saved the king's life last night, says he was attacked by rogues in the forest and someone healed him, but then disappeared before he could thank her properly." My heart stuttered. The medallion around my neck suddenly felt heavy as a stone. That's ridiculous," I managed. "Healed him how? With what magic?" Rosa shrugged, already turning back to her dough. "Who knows? The nobility live in a different world than we do. Probably just rumors getting blown out of proportion." "Still, exciting though, isn't it? Imagine if she were from our village." I couldn't imagine it. Didn't want to imagine it. Because if he found me, then what? I'd seen the way he looked at me in those final moments, like I was something precious and dangerous all at once, like I was something he intended to possess. The morning crawled by in a haze of kneading and baking and trying desperately not to think about the guards moving through the village like sharks through shallow water. Every time the shop bell rang, I flinched, certain it would be them. But it was only customers, villagers buying their daily bread, gossiping about the royal presence, speculating wildly about the mysterious healer. "I heard she was a witch," old Martha whispered to her companion, "that she used dark magic to ensnare the king." "Nonsense," her friend replied. "I heard she was a noble lady traveling in disguise, and that the king's already half in love with her." I kept my head down, focused on my work, and tried to ignore the way my hands shook every time someone mentioned him. It was mid-afternoon when Rosa burst into the back room, her eyes wide with excitement, and something that might have been fear. "Sarah, the king's advisor is outside. He's asking to speak with all the unmated Omegas in the village." The world tilted dangerously. "Why?" "Because whoever saved the king was an Omega. He could scent it, apparently. And she had pale hair." Rosa reached out, tugged gently on my braid, "like yours." "Half the Omegas in the northern territories have light hair," I said. But my voice sounded distant, disconnected from my body. "Yes, but how many of them were in the forest last night?" Rosa's expression turned serious, worried. "Sarah, where were you after the ceremony?" I couldn't lie to her. Not to Rosa, who'd shared her lunch with me on days when I'd had nothing, who'd never once treated me like I was less than worthy. "I went for a walk, in the woods. I needed to clear my head." She studied me for a long moment, and I watched understanding dawn in her eyes. "Oh, Sarah, what did you do?" "I helped someone who was hurt, that's all. I didn't know who he was, I swear. I couldn't leave him there to die." Rosa gripped my shoulders, her touch grounding me when I felt like I might float away. "Listen to me. The king's advisor is a man named Dominic Thorne. They say he can read lies like other people read books. If you try to hide this, he'll know, and if he thinks you're concealing information about an attack on the king..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. My throat felt tight. "What should I do?" "Tell the truth. You saved his life, Sarah. That's not a crime. That's..." She smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "That's the bravest thing I've ever heard." The walk from the bakery to the village square felt like a march to the gallows. Other Omegas had already gathered, maybe 15 or 20 of them, all with varying shades of light hair. Some I recognized from the ceremony, girls who'd been chosen, who now stood with their new mates' arms around them protectively. Others were younger, daughters of local families, looking more excited than afraid at the prospect of meeting someone from the royal court. And in the center of them, all stood Dominic Thorne. He was not what I expected. Tall, yes, and carrying himself with the unmistakable bearing of someone accustomed to power. But where I'd anticipated coldness, I found something more complex. Sharp intelligence in his dark eyes. A face that might have been handsome, if not for the severe set of his jaw, and an air of barely controlled intensity that made the hair on my arms stand up. His gaze swept across the assembled Omegas with the precision of a blade, dismissing most of them instantly, but when his eyes found me at the back of the crowd, half hidden behind a taller girl, they stopped. Locked. Held. "You," he said, his voice cutting through the nervous chatter like a knife through silk. "Come forward." My legs moved without my permission, carrying me through the parting crowd until I stood directly before him. Up close, I could see the faint scars on his hands, the weariness around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and heavy burdens. "Your name," he said, not a question, a command. "Serafina, but everyone calls me Sarah." "And where were you last night, Sarah, after the pairing ceremony?" The truth sat on my tongue, heavy and inevitable. I thought of Rosa's words, of grandmother's medallion pressing against my heart, of the way the king had looked at me in those final moments before I fled. "I was in the forest," I said quietly. "East of the clearing, maybe half a mile in, I found a man who'd been injured, badly injured. I tried to help him. The crowd around us had gone silent. I could feel their stares like brands against my skin, could already hear the whispers that would follow me for weeks, months, maybe forever." Dominic's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, satisfaction, maybe, or relief. "How did you help him?" This was the moment where I either told the truth or damned myself with a lie he'd see through anyway. "I kissed him," I whispered, and the words felt absurd, impossible, even as I spoke them. My grandmother used to tell stories about Omega healers, about how they could share life force through touch, through breath. I didn't really believe it, but he was dying, and I had to try something. So I kissed him, and I gestured helplessly, and it worked. The wounds closed. He could breathe again. I don't know how. I don't know why. I just know that it happened. Silence. The kind of silence that rings in your ears like a struck bell. Then Dominic did something unexpected. He smiled. It was a small smile, barely a curve of his lips, but it transformed his entire face. "The king will be very pleased," he said. "He's been searching for you since dawn." My stomach dropped. "I don't understand. I just did what anyone would know." The word was gentle, but firm. "You did what no one else could, and in doing so, you saved not just a man, but a kingdom. The king has no heir, no mate. If he had died last night," Dominic shook his head, "we would be facing civil war within a month." The weight of those words settled over me like a shroud. I'd saved a king, changed the course of history with a single desperate kiss. "What happens now?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. Dominic's smile faded, replaced by something more serious, more formal. "Now, you come with me. The king has requested an audience with his savior. And when the king requests, we don't refuse." He offered me his arm like I was someone important, someone worthy of such courtesy. I stared at it for a moment, this impossible thing, then slowly placed my hand on his sleeve. The crowd parted for us as we walked toward the sleek black vehicles waiting at the village edge, transportation I'd only ever seen from a distance, symbols of a world I'd never imagined touching. Behind us, I heard the whispers starting, building like a wave. "Did you hear? She saved the king." "Impossible. Look at her. She's nobody." "Nobody?" "Not anymore." I glanced back once, saw Rosa standing in the bakery doorway with her hand pressed to her heart and tears streaming down her face. She was smiling, though, genuinely smiling, and she mouthed 2 words that I carried with me as Dominic helped me into the vehicle. "Be brave." The door closed with a soft, final click, sealing me into leather seats and filtered air, and a future I couldn't begin to comprehend. Through the tinted window, I watched my village, the only home I'd ever known, grow smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely. Dominic sat across from me, his expression unreadable. "You're afraid," he observed. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "Wouldn't you be?" "Probably. But you should know something, Sarah." He leaned forward, his dark eyes intent on mine. "The king is complicated. He carries wounds that go deeper than anything those rogues could have inflicted. He's been searching for a mate for 3 years, and in all that time, no one has even come close to being worthy. Until you." "I'm not worthy," I said automatically. "I'm just an Omega who couldn't even get chosen at a pairing ceremony." "You're an Omega who brought a dying king back from the brink of death with nothing but compassion and courage. If that's not worthy, I don't know what is." He settled back in his seat, his gaze still fixed on me. "He's going to want to claim you, you know. As his mate, it's not just gratitude, though there's that too. It's instinct. You're his savior, and alpha instinct says to protect, to possess, to never let go of something so precious." The vehicle hummed beneath us, carrying us toward a destiny I'd never asked for. I touched my grandmother's medallion through my dress, felt its familiar shape, and heard her voice in my memory. "Choose compassion, child. I'd chosen it last night in the forest." And now, I would have to choose it again, every day, in a world of kings and courts and politics I didn't understand. If I was brave enough, the palace rose in the distance, white stone and soaring towers catching the late afternoon light like a crown of stars. And somewhere inside those walls, a king waited for the nobody who'd saved his life, for the Omega who'd stolen his breath with a kiss and then vanished into the night like a dream, for me. The palace was a living thing, breathing with the footsteps of 100 servants, exhaling the scent of beeswax and old stone, and something sharp that might have been authority itself. Dominic led me through corridors that seemed to stretch into infinity, past tapestries depicting battles I'd only heard about in stories, beneath chandeliers that caught the fading daylight and scattered it like captured stars. I felt desperately out of place in my simple work dress, flour still dusting my sleeves despite my attempts to brush it away. Every person we passed, guards in pristine uniforms, ladies in silk gowns, courtiers with jewels winking at their throats, stopped to stare, some with curiosity, others with barely concealed disdain. "Ignore them," Dominic murmured, though his hand had moved to rest protectively at my elbow. "Court vultures always circle when they sense something new. They'll pick you apart if you let them, searching for weaknesses. They won't have to search very hard," I said quietly. "I'm made of weaknesses." He stopped so abruptly I nearly stumbled. When he turned to face me, his expression was fiercer than I'd yet seen it. "Listen to me, Serafina. You walked into a dark forest alone. You knelt beside an alpha king covered in blood and dying, when every instinct should have told you to run. You channeled a power that most Omegas don't even believe exists anymore, and you did it without hesitation, without thought for yourself. Those aren't weaknesses. Those are the actions of someone stronger than most of the people in this palace will ever be." His words landed like stones in still water, creating ripples I could feel but not fully understand. Before I could respond, a door ahead of us opened and a woman emerged, tall and elegant, with dark hair swept into an intricate style and eyes like chips of ice. "Dominic," she said, her voice smooth as honey laced with poison. "I heard you found the little mystery healer. How quaint." She looked me up and down, and I watched her catalog every flaw, every sign of my low status. The corner of her mouth curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Lady Helena," Dominic said, his tone carefully neutral. "The king is expecting us." "Oh, I'm sure he is." Helena's gaze lingered on me, sharp and assessing. "Though I wonder what he'll think when he sees her in the light of day. Sometimes things look very different in the dark, don't they? Very different indeed." She swept past us in a whisper of expensive fabric, leaving behind the cloying scent of roses and something bitter I couldn't name. I watched her go, my stomach knotting with a new kind of anxiety. "Who is she?" I asked. Dominic's jaw tightened. "Lady Helena Sinclair, daughter of the Duke of Westmarch. She's been positioning herself as a potential mate for the king for the past 2 years. She won't be pleased about your arrival." "She has nothing to worry about," I said quickly. "I'm not here to— I don't expect— Sarah." Dominic's hand squeezed my elbow gently. "What you expect and what's about to happen might be 2 very different things. Just remember what I said. You're stronger than you think." We continued down the corridor, turning finally into a wing that felt different from the rest. Quieter, more private, with fewer servants scurrying about. The guards posted at regular intervals stood straighter here, their eyes more alert, their hands never far from their weapons. The king's personal quarters. Dominic stopped before a set of heavy oak doors carved with symbols I didn't recognize. He knocked twice, a pattern that seemed significant, and a voice from within called out, "Enter." That voice. I'd heard it rough with pain, weakened by approaching death, but even then I'd recognized the power in it. Now, restored to full strength, it resonated through the wood like distant thunder. The doors swung open, and Dominic guided me inside. The room was less opulent than I'd expected, more study than throne room, with bookshelves lining the walls and maps spread across a massive desk. Evening light poured through tall windows, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. And standing by those windows, his back to us, was the man I'd saved. He was taller than I remembered, broader through the shoulders, commanding space in a way that had nothing to do with size and everything to do with presence. He wore simple dark clothes that somehow looked more regal than any crown. His dark hair was clean now, falling just past his collar, and when he turned to face us, I forgot how to breathe, because those storm-gray eyes found mine immediately, locked on with an intensity that made my knees weak, and I saw recognition flare in them like lightning. "Leave us, Dominic," he said, never looking away from me. "Your Majesty? Protocol suggests." I said leave us. Softer this time, but no less absolute. Dominic hesitated for just a moment, then bowed and retreated, closing the doors behind him with a soft click that sounded impossibly final. And then we were alone, the king, because I couldn't think of him as anything else. Not here, not in this moment. Moved toward me with the fluid grace of a predator. Not threatening exactly, but undeniably powerful. He stopped just close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes, close enough that I could smell cedar and something darker, like smoke from a winter fire. "You ran," he said. It should have been an accusation. Instead, it sounded almost hurt. "I was scared," I answered honestly. Because what was the point of lying now? Of me? Of everything. Of what I'd done. Of what it might mean. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the room. "I didn't know who you were. I just knew you were someone important, and I am, nobody." He moved then, so fast I barely saw it, his hands coming up to cut my face with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the fierce look in his eyes. "Say that again." "I'm not— No." His thumb brushed across my cheekbone, and I shivered. "You are Seraphina. You are the Omega who saved my life when you could have walked away. You are the woman whose kiss pulled me back from death itself. You are the only person in 3 years who's made me feel—" He paused, something raw and vulnerable crossing his features. "Who's made me feel anything at all." My heart was racing so fast I thought it might break free from my chest. "I don't understand." "Neither do I." His laugh was short, almost bitter. "I've interviewed hundreds of potential mates. Nobles, warriors, scholars, Omegas who were bred specifically for the honor of becoming queen, and not one of them made me feel a fraction of what I felt when you touched me in that forest, when you chose to save a dying stranger instead of saving yourself. Anyone would have— No. Firm again. Final. They wouldn't have. Most people would have run, or stood there frozen, or tried to use the situation to their advantage. But you knelt in the dirt, and you gave me your breath, your life force, yourself, without knowing my name, without asking for anything in return." His forehead lowered until it rested against mine, and I could feel the warmth of his breath against my lips. "Do you have any idea how rare that is? How precious? I was drowning in his nearness, in the scent of him, in the way his hands held my face like I was something fragile and infinitely valuable. "What do you want from me?" "Everything," he whispered. "I want you to stay. I want you to let me know you, really know you. I want—" He pulled back just enough to look into my eyes. "I want the chance to deserve the gift you gave me." A knock at the door shattered the moment. The king's expression shifted immediately, becoming harder, more controlled. "What?" Dominic's voice came through the wood. "Your Majesty, forgive the interruption, but the council is demanding an emergency session. There's been a development." The king's hands dropped from my face, though I saw the reluctance in the movement, the way his fingers trailed against my skin as though memorizing its texture. "What kind of development?" "The rogues who attacked you last night. They weren't acting alone. There's evidence of a larger conspiracy, and the council believes there may be traitors within the palace itself." I watched the king's expression close off entirely, watched him transform from the man who touched me with such tenderness into something carved from ice and iron. "I'll be there momentarily, and the Omega, Your Majesty." His gaze returned to me, and for just a second, I saw the warmth flicker back to life in those gray depths. "She stays in the palace. Have rooms prepared for her in the East Wing. Comfortable rooms. And assign her a personal guard, someone trustworthy. I want her protected at all times. Your Majesty, the East Wing is reserved for people of importance." "Yes, I'm aware." The king's voice dropped into something that made even me shiver, and I wasn't the one being addressed. "Are you questioning my judgment, Dominic?" "Never, Your Majesty. I'll see to it immediately." The doors opened and Dominic appeared, his expression carefully blank. The king looked at me one more time, and I saw 1,000 things in that look. Promise, possession, protection, and something that might have been the beginning of something neither of us had words for yet. "We're not finished," he said softly. "This conversation, whatever this is between us, we're not finished, Serafina." Then he was striding past Dominic. His entire bearing shifted into the role of king, of commander, of the man who held a kingdom's fate in his hands. I watched him disappear down the corridor, surrounded immediately by guards and advisors, and felt the strange absence of his presence like a physical ache. "Well," Dominic said dryly. That was illuminating. I turned to him, still feeling shaky and off balance. "What just happened?" "If I'm not mistaken, the king just staked his claim." He offered me his arm again. "Come on. Let's get you settled before the court vultures start circling in earnest. They'll have heard about this within the hour, and they're going to want to know everything about the Omega who captured the king's attention in a single night." As we walked through the palace toward the East Wing, I caught glimpses of courtiers whispering behind their hands, servants averting their eyes, guards watching me with expressions that ranged from curiosity to outright suspicion. Helena Sinclair passed us in another corridor, and the look she gave me could have frozen fire. The rooms Dominic led me to were more luxurious than anything I'd ever imagined. Silk curtains, a bed large enough for 4 people, a bathing chamber with a tub carved from marble, a wardrobe already being filled with dresses in soft fabrics and muted colors that someone had apparently deemed appropriate for me. "A maid will be assigned to help you dress for dinner," Dominic explained. "And this is James." He gestured to a young guard who'd followed us, broad-shouldered and serious-faced. "He'll be your personal protection. Wherever you go, he goes. The king's orders." James bowed to me, actually bowed, like I was someone worthy of such respect. "My lady." "I'm not a lady," I said automatically. "The king seems to disagree." Dominic's expression softened slightly. "Get some rest, Sarah. You've had a rather extraordinary day. Tomorrow will likely be even more complicated." After they left, I stood in the center of the opulent room and tried to process everything that had happened. Just last night, I'd been the rejected Omega, the girl no one wanted. Now I was here, in the palace, in rooms reserved for people of importance, with the king's words still echoing in my mind. I want everything. I moved to the window and looked out over the palace grounds, over the city sprawling beyond the walls, over the forest in the distance where I'd knelt beside a dying man and changed both our fates with a single kiss. Grandmother's medallion pulsed warm against my heart, and I wrapped my fingers around it, seeking comfort in its familiar weight. I chose compassion, I whispered to her memory, to the darkening sky, to whatever gods might be listening. Now what? But the only answer was the evening wind, and the knowledge that somewhere in this vast palace, a king was fighting battles I couldn't see, protecting a kingdom I barely understood, and that somehow, impossibly, I'd become important to him. The thought terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. The maid who arrived to help me dress for dinner was younger than I expected, perhaps 16, with freckles scattered across her nose and nervous energy that reminded me of a startled rabbit. She introduced herself as Penny, and immediately set about transforming me into something I barely recognized. The dress she'd selected was deep blue, the color of twilight, with delicate silver embroidery along the bodice that caught the light when I moved. It fit perfectly, hugging curves I'd never paid much attention to, before flowing out into a skirt that whispered against the floor. Penny brushed out my pale hair until it shone, leaving it loose except for 2 small braids she wove near my temples, threaded with silver ribbon. "You look like moonlight," she breathed, stepping back to admire her work. Then her eyes widened, as though she'd spoken out of turn. "I'm sorry, that was too familiar." "It's beautiful," I said, cutting off her apology. "Thank you, Penny." She smiled, relieved, and the tension in her shoulders eased. "The king requested your presence at a private dinner. Just you and him and a few of his closest advisors. It's a great honor. An honor that felt more like walking into a den of wolves." But I nodded and let James escort me through the labyrinthine corridors to a smaller dining room that still managed to be more elegant than anything I'd ever seen. Candles flickered in silver holders, casting dancing shadows across walls, hung with paintings of stern-faced ancestors. A table was set for 6, the china so delicate I was afraid to breathe near it. I was the first to arrive. James took his position outside the door, and I stood awkwardly in the center of the room, unsure whether to sit or wait, my hands twisting nervously in the fabric of my skirt. The king entered moments later, and the air itself seemed to shift in his presence. He'd changed into formal attire, a deep charcoal jacket over a crisp white shirt, his dark hair brushed back from his face. But it was his expression that caught me, the way his eyes found me instantly, the way something in his severe features softened when he looked at me. "Serafina," he said, and my name in his voice felt like a caress. He crossed to me in 3 long strides, taking my hand and bringing it to his lips in a gesture that was both courtly and somehow intimate. "You look breathtaking." Heat crept up my neck. "I feel like I'm playing dress-up in someone else's life. You'll get used to it." He kept hold of my hand, his thumb tracing absent patterns across my knuckles, though I confess, I preferred you with dirt on your dress and determination in your eyes. There was something beautifully honest about you in that moment. "I'm still honest," I said quietly. "The dress doesn't change that." His smile was small, but genuine, transforming his entire face. "No, I suppose it doesn't." Before we could say more, others began arriving. Dominic entered first, nodding to both of us with an expression that might have been approval. Then came an older man with silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes. General Marcus Redfield. The king introduced him, commander of the royal forces. A woman followed, elegant and sharp-featured, introduced as Lady Vivian Cross, the king's chief strategist. And finally, to my dismay, Lady Helena Sinclair swept in wearing emerald silk and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Your Majesty," she purred, offering a curtsy that displayed considerably more grace than I could ever manage. How wonderful to be included in such an intimate gathering, and Miss... She turned to me, her eyebrows raised in polite inquiry. "Forgive me. I don't believe we were properly introduced earlier." "Serafina," the king said before I could respond, his hand moving to rest at the small of my back. A gesture of ownership that didn't escape anyone's notice. Though she prefers Sarah, she'll be staying at the palace as my personal guest. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. I watched Helena's smile freeze, watched calculation flicker behind her eyes. "How lovely," she said, though the words sounded like they'd been dragged over broken glass. "And what brings you to court, Sarah? Family connections? Political alliance?" "She saved my life," the king said flatly. "That's connection enough." We sat for dinner, and I found myself placed at the king's right hand, a position of honor that made Helena's jaw tighten where she sat across the table. The meal was elaborate, course after course of food I couldn't name, served on plates worth more than everything I'd ever owned. I ate carefully, hyper-aware of every movement, every glance, every subtle shift in the conversation swirling around me. General Redfield was discussing the attack from the previous night, his voice low and serious. "The rogues were well organized, Your Majesty. They knew your route, knew when you'd be most vulnerable. Someone fed them information, a traitor in the court," Lady Vivian added, her fingers steepled before her. "We've been conducting discreet inquiries. Several nobles have connections to the Eastern Territories, the same region these rogues came from." "Including my family," Helena interjected smoothly. "Though I assure you, Your Majesty, the Sinclairs have always been loyal to the crown." "These accusations are groundless." The king's expression remained neutral, but I felt the tension coiling in him like a spring wound too tight. "No one is above suspicion, Helena. Not even you." Her eyes flashed with something dangerous, but her smile never wavered. "Of course, Your Majesty. I would expect nothing less." Her gaze slid to me, sharp as a blade. "Though I do wonder, how convenient that our mysterious healer appeared exactly when she was needed. One might even say suspiciously convenient." The implication hung in the air like poison. I felt everyone's attention shift to me, felt the weight of their suspicion, their doubt. "Are you suggesting?" the king said, his voice dropping into something cold and dangerous. "That Sarah somehow orchestrated an attack that nearly killed me, just so she could save my life?" "I'm merely suggesting," Helena replied delicately, "that we know nothing about this girl. Where she comes from, what her true motivations are, whether she might be working with enough." The single word cracked like a whip. The king's hand found mine under the table, his fingers interlacing with my own in a grip that was both protective and possessive. Sarah acted with compassion and courage when she could have left me to die. She asked for nothing in return. Whatever conspiracy you're imagining, Helena, I suggest you abandon it. Now. Helena's smile turned brittle. "As you wish, Your Majesty, but the damage was done." I could see it in the way General Redfield studied me with new wariness, in the way Lady Vivian's expression had shuddered. Even Dominic looked troubled, though his concern seemed directed more at the situation than at me personally. The rest of the meal passed in strained conversation. I barely tasted the food, too aware of the undercurrents swirling around me, the politics I didn't understand, the games being played with words and glances and carefully constructed implications. When it finally ended, the king stood, still holding my hand. "Sarah, would you walk with me? There's something I'd like to show you." It wasn't really a request, and I found myself being led from the dining room under Helena's glacial stare and Dominic's worried one. James followed at a discreet distance, as the king guided me through corridors and up a winding staircase to a tower I hadn't yet seen. We emerged onto a balcony that overlooked the entire kingdom, the palace grounds spreading out below us, the city lights twinkling like earthbound stars, and beyond it all, the dark silhouette of the forest where our story had begun. "I'm sorry," the king said quietly, his hands gripping the stone balustrade. "For what Helena implied, for putting you in that position. She's not entirely wrong to be suspicious," I said. "I am a stranger. You don't know anything about me." He turned to face me, and in the moonlight, his features looked carved from marble, beautiful and remote and achingly lonely. "Then tell me everything. Where you come from, what your life was like before that night, what you dream about when you let yourself dream." So I did. Standing on that balcony with the night wind in my hair and the king's full attention fixed on me like a physical touch, I told him about my childhood, about losing my parents, about the pairing ceremony, and the rejection I'd learned to carry like a second skin. I told him about Rosa's kindness and my grandmother's stories, and the way I'd always felt like I was waiting for something without knowing what. He listened without interrupting, his eyes never leaving my face. And when I finally fell silent, he reached out and tucked a strand of my pale hair behind my ear. "Do you know what I see when I look at you?" he asked softly. I shook my head, not trusting my voice. I see someone who's been told her entire life that she's not enough, and who chose to be kind anyway. Someone who's been rejected and overlooked and underestimated, and who still knelt in the dirt to save a dying stranger. His hand cupped my cheek, thumb brushing away a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. I see the strongest person I've ever met. I'm not strong, I whispered. I'm terrified. Of this place, of these people, of whatever's happening between us. Being strong doesn't mean not being afraid. It means being afraid and doing the brave thing anyway. He stepped closer, until I could feel the heat of him, until his scent wrapped around me like a blanket. I want to court you properly, Serafina. I want to give you time to know me, to decide if I am what you want. But you need to understand something. What? His other hand came up, framing my face between his palms, and the look in his eyes made my breath catch. I am not a patient man. I am not particularly good or gentle or easy to love. I've made enemies. I've made hard choices, and I carry scars that go deeper than skin. Being with me means becoming a target. It means entering a world of politics and danger, and people like Helena who will do anything to tear you down. Then why? I asked, even as my hands came up to rest against his chest, feeling the steady thunder of his heartbeat beneath my palms. Why me? Why not choose someone who already knows how to navigate this world? Because when I look at every other Omega, every other potential mate, I see political alliances and strategic advantages and carefully constructed performances. But when I look at you, his forehead lowered to rest against mine, and his voice dropped to barely a whisper. I see home. I see peace. I see someone who might actually see me. Not the king, not the alpha. Just me. I tilted my head up, drawn by some instinct older than thought, and our lips met in a kiss that was nothing like the desperate magical exchange in the forest. This was slower, sweeter, filled with promise and possibility, and the tentative beginning of something that terrified us both. When we finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine and laughed. A real laugh, surprised and genuine. You're going to turn my entire world upside down, aren't you? I don't know how, I admitted. I'm just me. Just you, he repeated, smiling against my hair, is more than enough. And we stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other in the night, while far below us the palace churned with secrets and plots, and the beginning of a storm we couldn't yet see coming. But in that moment, on that balcony, with his arms around me and hope blooming fragile in my chest, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, I could belong here, that maybe I'd finally found the place where being exactly who I was would be enough. The days that followed blurred together in a strange dance of wonder and anxiety. I woke each morning in silk sheets that felt foreign against my skin, dressed in gowns that transformed me into someone I barely recognized in the mirror, and navigated a world where every smile hid calculation and every word carried weight I was still learning to measure. But through it all, he was there, the king, though in private moments, he'd asked me to call him by his given name, Cassian, carved time from his impossible schedule to walk with me through the palace gardens, to share quiet meals in his study, to teach me the subtle language of court politics with a patience that surprised us both. He was careful with me, I realized, gentle in ways that contrasted sharply with the commanding presence he showed the world. You're staring, I said one afternoon as we sat in the library, sunlight streaming through tall windows to paint patterns across the ancient books surrounding us. I'd been reading, or trying to, while he worked through correspondence at a nearby desk. I'm memorizing, he corrected, setting down his pen. The way the light catches your hair, the little furrow that appears between your eyebrows when you're concentrating. The way you bite your lower lip when you're trying not to laugh at something improper I've said. Heat crept up my neck. That's thorough. I'm a thorough man. He stood, crossing to where I sat, and held out his hand. Come. There's somewhere I want to take you. I let him pull me to my feet, let him interlace our fingers in a gesture that had become achingly familiar over the past week. James followed at his usual discreet distance as Cassian led me through corridors I'd not yet explored, down into the older parts of the palace where the stone was darker and the air smelled of history and secrets. We stopped before a heavy wooden door carved with symbols similar to those on my grandmother's medallion. My heart stuttered with recognition. What is this place? The old temple, Cassian said, producing an ancient key. It hasn't been used in decades. Most people have forgotten it exists, but I thought, given what you did in the forest, given the power you channeled, you might want to see it. The door swung open with a groan of protest, revealing a circular chamber lit only by thin shafts of light filtering through cracks in the ceiling. And covering every surface, the walls, the floor, even parts of the domed ceiling, were symbols. Omega symbols. Stories carved in stone about healers and magic and the old ways that my grandmother had whispered about in her tales. I stepped inside, my breath catching as I traced my fingers over the ancient markings. It's beautiful. It's your heritage, Cassian said quietly, coming to stand behind me. His hand settled on my shoulders, warm and grounding. Omega healers were once revered, protected, honored as the bridge between life and death. But over time, as Alpha's consolidated power, as strength became valued over compassion, the old ways were forgotten, suppressed even. I turned to face him, seeing new understanding in his expression. You knew. About the healing magic. You knew it was real. My grandmother was an Omega healer, he admitted. She died when I was young, but I remember her stories, remember the way she could ease pain with a touch, could sense illness before it manifested. When you saved me in that forest, when I felt that power flowing through you, he cupped my face, his expression intense. I knew exactly what you were, what you are, and you wanted me anyway? The question came out smaller than I'd intended. Even though it marks me as different, as it marks you as extraordinary. His thumb brushed across my cheekbone. And yes, I wanted you, want you. Not despite who you are, Serafina, but because of it. I stood on my toes and kissed him, pouring everything I couldn't yet say into the press of my lips against his. He responded immediately, one hand sliding into my hair while the other pulled me closer until there was no space left between us. The kiss deepened, turned hungry, and I felt that same power stirring in my chest. Not the desperate life-saving magic of the forest, but something gentler. Connection. Recognition. The beginning of a bond that went deeper than simple attraction. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cassian rested his forehead against mine. I need to tell you something, he said, his voice rough. The council is pressuring me to announce my choice of mate. They want stability, want to ensure the line of succession. And there are complications. My stomach dropped. Helena. Among others, there are factions within the court who believe I should choose based on political advantage, family connections, strategic alliances. His hands tightened on me, almost painful in their intensity. But I don't want strategic. I don't want advantageous. I want... A sound echoed through the temple. Footsteps moving fast. James appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. Your Majesty, forgive the interruption. General Redfield requires your immediate presence. There's been an incident. Cassian's entire demeanor shifted, the tender man disappearing behind the king's mask. What kind of incident? An attack. On the eastern border, the same rogues who targeted you, but in greater numbers. James's gaze flickered to me, worried. And they're demanding an audience, with you and with the Omega healer. Ice flooded my veins. With me? Why? That's what we need to find out. Cassian's jaw was set, his eyes hard. Stay close to me, Serafina. Whatever happens next, you stay close. The war room was chaos when we arrived. Generals shouting over maps, advisors arguing about response strategies, and at the center of it all, a messenger who looked like he'd ridden hard and fast, his clothes torn and face haggard. Your Majesty, he gasped, dropping to one knee. The rogue leader. He says he won't negotiate with anyone but you and the Omega who possesses healing magic. He claims she's the key to everything. That she's, the messenger swallowed hard, that she's the last daughter of the Moonborn line, and that her power belongs to his people. The room fell silent. I felt every eye turn to me, felt the weight of their stares like physical pressure. The Moonborn line? Lady Vivian's voice cut through the silence. But that bloodline was eliminated generations ago, during the purge of healers, Cassian finished, his voice tight. He looked at me, and I saw 100 questions in his eyes. When Alpha leaders decided that Omega magic was too dangerous to be allowed to flourish, they systematically hunted down the most powerful bloodlines and my grandmother survived, I whispered, pieces clicking into place. The medallion, the stories, the way she'd always insisted I was special, chosen, meant for something more. She must have hidden, changed her name, lived in obscurity to protect you, Dominic said quietly. He'd been standing in the shadows, but now he stepped forward, his expression grave. If you're truly moonborn, Sarah, then your healing abilities are far more powerful than we realized. You could heal armies, could bring people back from the brink of death dozens of times over. You'd be... He paused, choosing his words carefully. You'd be a strategic asset worth going to war for. The room spun slightly. I don't want to be a strategic asset. I just want to... To what? Helena's voice dripped with false sweetness as she swept into the war room, her timing impeccable as always. To play at being queen? To pretend you belong in a world you have no understanding of? She turned to Cassian, her expression crafted into perfect concern. Your Majesty, surely you see the danger here. This girl has brought nothing but chaos since she arrived. First the attack on you, now this threat at our borders. Perhaps it would be wise to... To what, Helena? Cassian's voice could have cut steel. To hand her over to rogues who would use her power as a weapon? To send her away? Is that your suggestion? Helena's mask slipped, just for a moment, revealing the calculation beneath. I'm merely suggesting that the kingdom's safety should come before personal entanglements. The kingdom's safety, Cassian said softly, dangerously, is not ensured by sacrificing innocent people to appease enemies. It's ensured by standing against those who would threaten us, by protecting those who need protection, and by refusing to compromise our values for convenience. He moved to stand beside me, his hand finding mine, his touch grounding me when I felt like I might shatter. Serafina is under my personal protection. Anyone who threatens her threatens me. Is that clear? The declaration hung in the air, absolute and unmistakable. I watched Helena's face flush with rage barely contained, watched the generals exchange glances that ranged from approval to concern. Then what do you propose, Your Majesty? General Redfield asked. The rogues won't withdraw without getting what they want. Then we give them something they don't expect. Cassian's grip on my hand tightened. We give them me. No. The word burst from me before I could stop it. You can't go there. It's obviously a trap, which is why I won't be going alone. He turned to face me fully, and I saw the plan forming behind his eyes. I'll bring my full guard, my most trusted advisors, and you. Because if they want to see the last daughter of the Moonborn line, they'll see her, standing beside her king, protected and valued, not cowering in fear. Cassian, trust me, he said quietly, for my ears alone. Trust that I won't let anything happen to you. That I'd burn the world before I'd let them take you from me. The rawness in his voice, the absolute conviction, made my breath catch. I thought of my grandmother's words. Choose compassion, even when fear demands otherwise. Thought of the night in the forest when I'd knelt beside a dying man and chosen to help, rather than run. Okay, I whispered. I trust you. The journey to the eastern border took 2 days by swift horses and armed convoy. I rode beside Cassian, wearing practical clothes that Penny had helped me choose. Still finer than anything I'd owned before, but suited for travel. James never left my side, and I noticed that Dominic had positioned himself and several other guards in a protective formation around us. We made camp the first night in a clearing that reminded me achingly of where this all began. As the others set up tents and built fires, Cassian pulled me aside, into the shadows at the forest's edge. Are you afraid? He asked, his hand sliding up my arms to rest on my shoulders. Terrified, I admitted, but I'm here anyway. He smiled. That rare, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. That's my brave Omega. Then, more seriously, whatever happens tomorrow, I need you to know something. I was going to wait, was going to court you properly for weeks or months, but time feels uncertain, and I refuse to face an uncertain future without telling you the truth. My heart hammered against my ribs. What truth? That I'm falling in love with you, he said simply, as though the words weren't completely rearranging my entire world. That from the moment you touched me in that forest, from the moment you gave me your breath and your life force and asked for nothing in return, I've been falling. Helplessly. Completely. Inevitably. Tears burned behind my eyes. I don't know how to be what you need. I don't know how to be a queen, or a political asset, or anything other than just me. Good. He pulled me closer, until I could rest my head against his chest and hear the steady beat of his heart. Because just you is all I've ever wanted. Just you is all I'll ever need. I tilted my head up and kissed him, tasting salt from tears I hadn't realized were falling. I'm falling too, I whispered against his lips, and it terrifies me. But I wouldn't stop even if I could. We stood there in the gathering darkness, holding each other like we could somehow protect what we'd found from whatever tomorrow might bring. The rogue camp was larger than I'd expected. Dozens of tents, hundreds of fighters, all bearing the marks of the Eastern territories. They'd chosen their meeting ground carefully. An open field with nowhere to hide, nowhere to run if things went wrong. The rogue leader was a tall man with sharp features and eyes that assessed me with uncomfortable intensity the moment we arrived. He introduced himself as Corvus, chieftain of the Silverpine clan. So, he said, his gaze fixed on me. The moonborn child lives. Your grandmother hid you well. My grandmother protected me, I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady, as any loving family member would. Protected you from your own people, Corvus countered. From those who would have honored your power, celebrated your gifts, taught you to wield them properly. Instead, you grew up thinking yourself weak, unwanted, when you're anything but. Cassian moved slightly, positioning himself between us. Get to your point, Corvus. Why demand this meeting? Why threaten my kingdom? Because your kingdom, the Alpha-ruled kingdoms, stole everything from us during the Purge. Corvus's voice hardened. They hunted down our healers, destroyed our sacred sites, suppressed the Omega magic that once kept balance in our world. And now you have the last moonborn daughter, and you'd keep her locked in your palace like a pretty bird in a cage. I'm not a prisoner, I said, stepping around Cassian despite his growl of protest. I'm here by choice. Everything I've done has been by choice. Has it? Corvus tilted his head, studying me. Or has he simply used his alpha influence, his power, his position to convince you that you want what he wants? The question struck deeper than I'd expected, because hadn't I wondered the same thing? Hadn't I questioned whether my feelings were real, or simply the result of instinct and proximity, and the intoxicating power of being wanted for the first time in my life? But then I thought of quiet moments in the library, of conversations that stretched long into the night, of the way Cassian listened when I spoke and valued my opinions even when they differed from his own. I thought of how he'd respected my boundaries, had given me time and space and choice at every turn. He gave me a choice, I said firmly. Every day, he gives me a choice. To stay or leave, to accept or refuse, to be his mate or simply his friend. That's more freedom than I've ever had. Corvus studied me for a long moment. Then something in his expression shifted. You love him. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. Yes. Even knowing what it will cost you? The people you'll be separated from? The traditions you'll never learn? The power you'll never fully understand? I felt Cassian tense beside me, felt the weight of everyone's attention, but I kept my gaze fixed on Corvus. Then teach me, I said. Don't threaten war or kidnapping or violence. Just teach me. Help me understand where I come from, what my gifts mean, how to use them properly. Not as a weapon, not as a strategic asset, but as what they were always meant to be. Healing, compassion, bridge between life and death. Silence fell across the field. I saw surprise flicker across Corvus's face, saw calculations shifting behind his eyes. "You would ask this?" he said slowly. "Knowing your Alpha King might forbid it? Knowing it could cause conflict within your new court?" "I would ask it," I confirmed, then turned to Cassian. "If my king permits?" Cassian's expression was unreadable, but his hand found mine, squeezed gently. "I will marry, a healer, not a weapon, not a political tool, a woman with her own gifts, her own heritage, her own choices." He turned to Corvus. "If you're willing to teach rather than threaten, to share knowledge rather than wage war, then yes, I permit it. Welcome it, even." The tension broke like a snapped thread. I watched Corvus's shoulders relax, watched something like respect dawn in his eyes. "Then perhaps," he said slowly, "there's hope for balance yet, for healing the wounds between our people, for restoring what was lost." He bowed, not deeply, not subserviently, but with genuine respect. "With your permission, Alpha King, I would send teachers to your court, elders who remember the old ways. And in return, perhaps some of your healers might learn from us as well." Negotiations lasted hours, but the threat of war had passed. By the time we rode back toward the palace, a tentative peace had been forged, one built not on dominance or submission, but on mutual respect and the promise of shared knowledge. 3 weeks later, I stood in the throne room wearing a gown of silver and white, my pale hair woven with flowers that Penny had spent hours perfecting. The room was packed with nobles and dignitaries, with guards and servants, with faces that had become familiar over the past month. And at the end of the long aisle, waiting for me with his hand extended and his storm-gray eyes fixed on mine, with an intensity that stole my breath, stood Cassian. The ceremony was a blur of ancient words and sacred vows, of the weight of a crown settled gently on my head, of Cassian's lips finding mine in a kiss that sealed us together before gods and kingdom. When we finally pulled apart, his hand still cradling my face, he whispered words meant only for me, my queen, my healer, my home. "My king," I whispered back. "My protector, my choice." The throne room erupted in cheers, but I barely heard them. Because I was looking at the man I loved, the man who'd seen me when I was invisible, who'd valued me when I felt worthless, who'd given me a choice and then fought to protect that choice with everything he had. And I thought of my grandmother's medallion, still resting against my heart beneath the wedding gown. Thought of her words that had guided me through darkness and fear and impossible choices. "Choose compassion, child." I had, and in choosing it, I'd found not just a mate, but a purpose. Not just a crown, but a calling. Months passed, and the palace transformed around me. Omega teachers from Corvus's clan arrived and began sharing the old healing ways, teaching not just me, but any who wished to learn. The temple was restored, becoming once again a place of light and knowledge and the gentle magic that flowed through compassionate touch. Helena had left court quietly after the wedding, returning to her family's estates with whatever dignity she could salvage. I'd sent her a letter, short, kind, wishing her well. She never responded, but I'd made peace with that. Rosa visited often, her belly round with her first child, married to a kind beta from the next village over. We'd sit in the garden while Penny brought us tea, and she'd tell me stories about home that made my heart ache with nostalgia and swell with gratitude that I'd found a new home too. And every night, Cassian would find me, in our chambers, in the library, in the temple where I spent long hours learning from the elders. He'd pull me close and press his forehead to mine, and in those quiet moments, I'd feel the bond between us strengthening, deepening, becoming something unbreakable. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked one evening as we stood on our balcony, watching the sun set over the kingdom we ruled together. "Staying? Choosing this life?" I thought about the girl I'd been, invisible, rejected, certain she'd never be enough. Then I thought about who I'd become. Healer, queen, bridge between old ways and new, loved, valued, finally, impossibly home. "Not even for a moment," I said, turning to kiss him as the last light faded and the stars began to emerge. "Not even for a heartbeat." And in the gathering darkness, with his arms around me and the future stretching out before us like an unwritten story, I knew with absolute certainty that I'd made the right choice, that compassion had led me exactly where I needed to be, that sometimes the unwanted girl becomes the queen who changes everything.